Welcome, everyone. Coach Reslow here from ResV Systems, continuing on in our interview series. And man, I've been blessed to have so many really great people on thus far, and the streak continues. We have a legend in the game with Craig Kolek, the Rivier University coach. I almost said Riv College because it was Riv College for as long as I could remember, but I know you're university now. But Craig, welcome to the show, man. How are we doing?
Doing great, Coach. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it's one of these things that's happened, Coach, is that as I've gone through this interview series, I've been shocked at how many people are interested in talking volleyball with me on on YouTube and on my show. So, dude, the pleasure's all mine. Really stoked to have you. Excited to talk a little bit about the game. How you doing these days?
Absolutely. Doing great. Doing great. Staying busy.
Yeah.
Downtime right now. The students are home, so trying to pick up everything else around the school and then also get the life back together after a coaching stint. You know how that goes.
Sure. Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Isn't it weird how like you go through go, go, go the entire time and then it comes to a crashing halt and then you have this like moment where like, well, now what do I do?
It's super weird. Like the first weekend after the season is done, you're kind of looking around like what's this is a Saturday. Why am I not doing anything?
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to lead off first off, congratulations all your success. And really that's the tipping point of the interview where, you have 500 plus wins for the men and 450 or 445 for the women. I mean, unbelievable accomplishments in the game. Start with before we go into the background, because that's the next question. How'd you get in the game? How'd you start loving it? All that fun stuff. But I mean, have you ever sat back and looked at your win total and been like, my God, what I've accomplished?
I didn't up until really we I was the first coach to have 400 in both men and the women.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
an NCAA first for all three divisions. So when that number popped up and our SID kind of brought that up, then they started to look at the numbers and you look back a little and go, yep, it sounds about right because you know how much work you put into it
That's
and
right. Yeah.
what you've done. So it's a little eye opening when you see the numbers and you see some of the stats and you see kind of the accolades that have rolled in because of you're coaching a sport that you just love to coach.
Mm.
It's pretty cool. So it was eye opening. And then when I got to 1,000, obviously just more of that and the interviews and everything. It's eye opening for sure. So pretty cool.
Super cool. And, a lot of those wins, I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do at ResV is pump up the idea that I'm close to 200 wins. Now, I mean, it's a that's it's a stone throws away from you, clearly, just a stone throw. But one of the things that I do to get that number to 200 is that you count all the tournaments that you're involved in, you count all the non-sanctioned bouts, for lack of a better term, that you've been in. So you're probably well north. You're probably closer to 1,500 than anything else.
Yeah, it's even just the number of games coached is pretty surreal if you
Mm.
really break it down and the number of practices and all that. Just the
Oh yeah.
if you break it into the numbers that way, it's it's a really weird number. It's a lot of work.
It certainly is. So how do we get started, man? Talk about your background, how we got into this world.
That was interesting. I didn't I basically probably like everybody else in the world. I started playing with my family when I was young, just kind of in the backyard. But I played a lot of different sports, and hockey was one of my main loves. And I ended up tearing my quadricep muscle in half when
Ooh.
I was in college playing. So at that point, I was smaller at the time for hockey, and so I was just really getting the crap beat out of me a lot. So I decided like that was it. I'm done with hockey, and just started playing on the beach a little bit with a couple of friends of mine.
Mm.
And then for some reason we thought we were getting better, and so a good friend of mine, we decided to move to Florida, and we trained basically full time. Played beach
Mm.
volleyball for about 7 years. We tried following the AVP around, waited tables at night, and trained all during the day and lived that life for a good number of years. So it was really at that point when we were getting better and playing at a pretty good level, I actually started coaching just for side money, just for
Mm.
coaching a high school team near Rivier, just to pick up a little bit of cash so that I could travel some more and
Yeah.
try to continue a career as far as playing volleyball. But then I got the coaching bug, and we know how that goes. Once you get it gets into you, the bug kind of takes a hold, and it was something that I really feel that I was born to do, was coach. And once that caught, I was able to get to Rivier as a part-time coach for the men's team. And then 2 years later, our AD did something that was absolutely taboo for sports at the time, and that was make the women's basketball coach, who was full-time as the basketball coach, volleyball coach. She cut that position and made women's basketball part-time to make volleyball full-time with me for men and the women. So she caught a lot of grief for, volleyball is not the main focus sport for, it's not the what basketball is, right? So the big sport. So she caught a lot of grief for doing that, making a basketball coach part-time. But I always tell her it was the best decision she ever made. so I tell her that every day I see her. So that's really about it. And just kind of started coaching from there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's funny, the basketball world. I lived in both those worlds. I played college basketball, but not at the highest level, but at a decent level, and certainly had opportunities to play, overseas when I graduated a little bit. But again, never really made a dent. But I lived in that world, but I always looked at the volleyball world and enjoyed it way, way more. Like, once I got into it and started learning how it worked, I found I liked the people better, and I liked the vibe generally better than what basketball was. So maybe she just knew something right away. I was like, look, basketball's
Yeah,
let's go volleyball.
Could be, right?
Let's go volleyball.
Hopefully it was a vibe that I was giving off, but I agree. It's definitely
I'm sure.
It's a different vibe.
Yeah. Well, maybe she played and she's like, you know what? This basketball is terrible. I hate this stuff. I'm never gonna do this again.
Ironically, she was the coach. She started the men's program, so she coached 2 years prior to me and got it going. So she did have a little bit of background from it.
All right, there it is. There it is. So you've been doing this a long, long time, man. How many years now?
26 total. 26 for men, and I this was my first year. I did not coach the women, so I coached 24 with them.
And how has the game changed in that time period? Like I know I got involved in 2009, and you had been established already, and you were already the big dog on the block in the men's game, certainly, in the women's game as well, if I recall. But from 2009 to 2020, when my career ended, I noted some things that were pretty interesting that have changed, and I wondered if you feel the same way.
I think the biggest thing, obviously, there's rules changes every year, and when I first started, there was side out scoring and games to 15 and all that, and then they started playing with rally scoring, and games went to 30 at one point. And
I remember
so
that.
Just besides things like that, I think for me the biggest thing that I've seen with the change is the growth of the teams being added now. We had talked a little bit before this, before this being recorded, is that there seems to be teams pop up every year you just don't know, you never even heard of. So for me that's changed. I think for me, it's always had a good vibe, and it's become a little bit too much of, I like to, who should be noticed are the players on the court and not the sidelines. And I feel it's starting to be a culture of, and it's been this way for a while, that let's see who has the best antics on the sidelines and who has the best chance. And I'm not a big fan of it. Like, I get it. And, but it can get a little bit out of hand. And so for me, like, that's it wasn't that way when I first started, at least to the level that it is now. But it's grown that way.
That's a good point. I mean, I remember trying, when I was getting into my first goal when I got to Johnson Wales was to look the part. I didn't have all the knowledge, but I was like, I got to look the part. So like I would look to guys like you and guys like Cal Wickens and some other dudes that, like, how do they handle their business and what does that look like? And I liked your situation better, which was you would sit and be like, you guys are good. And I was like, that was my goal. Like, I want to be good enough where I can just sit and be like, you guys are good. But then the other part that I thought Cal did a real nice job was that his team did have some of those antics, but they were all on the up and up for the most part. Like they were all decent enough. And then when they went out of line, like he would go nuts on them. And I was like, all right, that's cool. That's cool. But as soon as I got some players from a different club that were, that didn't understand that. You know, you'd be coaching, all of a sudden you hear your bench say something that's really, really stupid, and you turn around and go, "What are you doing?" Like, no, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember we were playing Stevens, and I actually told this story the other day. We were playing Stevens. Jay Wu, it was 2012. We were just starting to be pretty good, and we, we were playing Stevens. Stevens was like third or fourth in the country at the time, and they said him, their middle was an all-American, and they said him, and he hit the ball out of bounds by like maybe 4 feet. He just missed it, right? Just missed it. Thumped it, but missed it. And our
Yeah.
bench, who was a bunch of these new guys on the club that I've definitely had some work to do with them in terms of the culture side of things. You know, they start chanting, "You can't do that." And the look on that kid's face as he turned to look at us, and then I was like, "Oh no."
Just poked the bear.
Dude, he proceeded to hit 900, and I think he put 4 divots in the floor.
Yeah.
Every time he got set, he was just thumping it and looking at our bench, and I was like, "Oh, you know, you put your head down." I think the kid finished like, you know, with 20 kills, and of course, by set 3, their setter's like, "All right, we're gonna go to this
Right.
kid over and over
Yeah.
again."
Yeah. You just
And we had
woke the
to
sleeping giant.
and we had to learn real fast that that's not how we behave, or else you're gonna get the you're gonna get it. So, but that's interesting. The sideline stuff. How about the players in general? Have the players changed from when you started to where you are now?
I think so. I mean, I think, it's a different training now. I think it's, we've always had, when I first started, like we had good players that became better by the time they left here. We didn't necessarily have the best players, but we trained them up and coached them up to, become pretty good.
Hmm.
My first few years was a pretty tough group of kids, like just street tough. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That kind of toughness, and so they brought that to the court. And so there was a lot of I'm not backing down type of mentality, and you didn't have to teach it. Now I feel like there's a lot of kids that come in that are great kids, but now you have to teach them that toughness. You have to teach them how to really compete, and outwork your competitors. So that's probably the biggest change I've seen from my programs over the years. If I were to compare like the 2006 team as a team that, won the neck throw, went to the Final Four, that was a gritty, grind them out team. And if I compare them to, 2019 was our last championship team. Not that the first '06 team weren't good group of guys, but the 2019 was a really nice group of guys. Yeah, I mean, so that was a work in progress. Like we had to teach them through their years as freshmen, like, okay, this is how you have to compete and how you have to grind things out. And you didn't have to
Yeah,
teach that to the earlier crew.
that's an excellent point. I remember doing that a couple of times, teaching how to compete, and actually I do it now at the club level, because everyone competes well when you're up by 4 or 5 points.
Yep.
Nobody
Yep.
compete. Apparently, no one knows how to compete anymore when you're down 7. Like, how
Yeah.
does that work? Like, how do you battle back? You know, we got our clocks cleaned against an ACAD team this year in Boston, and it was like, well, they're thumping us. Well, keep competing. Who cares? Like
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
you don't just give them hitting lines now. Like you fight. You know, so that's interesting. And as you go through that process, has it been harder to get those kids to snap into that gritty mode, or is it just they haven't been taught, and then once they know, they snap right into it?
I think it's a combination of both. I think some players pick it up pretty quick.
Mm,
And I take a pretty good amount of pride that I can teach that well.
yeah.
And so I think the ones that really buy into that mental toughness and buy into being able to be somebody different on the court than they are off the court. Um, Once they grasp that and once they're able to buy into it, I think it's easy for them to figure it out, and they figure it out quicker. The ones that are kind of hesitant and don't want to try it and don't want to really, kind of, they fall back to their old, like, oh man, they're smoking us. I'm just, what do I do? I'm
Oh,
just not
yeah.
going to do anything. They're harder to change. So
Mm,
it's, it depends upon the certain person, So part of it is when you're recruiting, you're looking for that kid now that like, is it
yeah.
coachable mentally as well? Can we find somebody, if he doesn't have that grit, can we coach that kid in that? Because that's what it comes down to. You've been around long enough. You know that you got to grind out to win those games.
Oh, yeah.
And you got kids that won't back down, like you said, with the club team.
Yeah, I used to preach, well, at least the last 5 years of my career, I used to preach, "Hey, we can already beat the bad teams. Like, what we gotta do is see if we can see if we can beat the good teams, and what's that gonna take?"
Yeah.
And, and it's a mental toughness and the ability to fight and scratch and claw. And then the other thing too, which was always key for me, was explaining and understanding that, it doesn't matter what the scores are. Like, we just got to win 3 sets. So if we
Yeah.
lose 25-2 in set 2 and still win the match, who gives a crap? Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But kids don't see it that way. They're just like,
Right.
oh, we got embarrassed. Like, no, we didn't. Like, we're still in the match. It's not over
Right.
yet. Like, let's
It's
keep
it's
battling.
interesting you bring that up too, because that's probably a different circumstance. So that going back to the early 2000s, like when you coached, or I felt like when I coached, it was like, hey, do this.
Mhm.
Right. And then they would go out and do it. And if they didn't do it, then it would be kind of a butting head situation. Right. And you kind of had to, alpha dog it a little bit.
Sure.
Nowadays, it's like, hey, this is why we're going to do this, because they want an explanation. Like, why are we doing this? You know what I mean? So I think that change of philosophy and that change of the generation of kids is, before it was like, do it or else. And now it's, they'll always ask, like, why are we doing this? If they have information about why they're doing it, they'll do it.
The why matters, like Simon Sinek, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is the why, and how does that? As long as you know the why, you can be who you're supposed to be. Do you have
Yeah.
any particular moments or players that helped mold your coaching styles throughout the years? Because what you just said brought up a thought. Like, I have one kid in particular who ended up, being pretty good for me, but he ended up leaving. Actually, left because the program died. But you know. He changed my coaching world when I called a timeout because we were getting thumped or something was happening, and I got into the huddle, and I identified the problem. Hey, and this is the example. We're not passing well enough. We have to improve our passing so that we have a shot to run our offense and get our middles going, which will open up everything. And the kid looked me dead in my face and goes, agree, but how? How do I do that? Like,
Yeah.
tell me the how. Give me something to work on. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God, yes, I got to give you the answer.
I think the kids that are sponges, the kids are the ones that do what you just said, are the ones that are like volleyball junkies. I
Yeah.
think they're the ones that, like, they're just around the sport 365 days a year. So those are the ones that you really, because they're constantly digging for, like, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? Whereas the ones that still love the sport, but they're just like, hey, I want to go out, get better, compete, be the best I can. Um, they still, how do I say this? They still love the sport as much, but for them, it's, they want to know just because they just want to get better for that moment.
Mm,
Whereas that volleyball junkie just needs that input, needs that feedback. So for me, I think it was later in the years. Like, I've always taught the mental piece of the game at younger in my career.
mm.
But I think, like, so for example, Garrett Buckland, who you know really well. So
Love
he's an
them.
example where loved the kid to death, came in, had played for so many years before he even came into our program, right? Kind of grew up around the sport, but he had to learn that culture of the sport itself, because he was been around it for so long, but didn't understand what it really was to empower your teammates, to have that culture piece. And so he'd be picking at that. And he
Mm,
would, he wasn't maybe getting as much time as he wanted, but he would ask why, and he would ask the question. So Garrett, for me, probably was a transition point from here on in. That was 2014, I think, with Garrett,
yeah,
2015.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, from there on in, like the last 7 years, everything has been that type of player where you're kind
Mm,
of constantly explaining what's going on. Prior to that, there'd be bits and pieces. There'd be some players that, like I said, were volleyball junkies, and some players that absolutely love the sport, but would just do what you told them to do.
mm.
Just because they trust the process, they trust the coach, they trust whatever it is. If that's what coach said, then this is what I'm going to go out and do. But I think when Garrett came around, that whole tide kind of shifted a little bit.
Yeah. And did that, I guess the other thing that has me thinking about Garrett and some of the other, you've always been very, very good with your culture, like your culture on your team. You have good leaders. Like, how is that some of the things I mean, certainly it goes hand in hand with the mental toughness aspect of the game and being successful and the responsibility of doing your job. But but in general, when you start building team culture, what are some of the things that you used to really work on or still do?
Still do, right? Still
Yeah,
build
yeah, yeah,
cultures built every year.
yeah.
When I first, so I'm like super close with my family. My parents are always coming to the games, and my brother and his nephews and nieces. So very much a family atmosphere, and you hear that from I think a lot of programs like family, like that's really kind of thrown around. And your description of
Yeah.
family is probably different than my family, or my definition. But for me, it was three things. It was compassion, understanding, and empathy.
Mm,
So if you could figure out those three things with each other, and we would do a lot of work of that off the court. If teammates could figure out those things with each other, then the on the court stuff was easy. And so we kind of built our culture around, I call it Q leadership, compassion, understanding, empathy. We built our culture around that.
mm,
Um, and the volleyball, once that was in place, the volleyball piece was just easy, and guys were just playing, and everybody knew
yeah,
where everybody stood, and
yeah.
understood why things were happening. Um, but I think the biggest thing is that when players came in, we would talk about what our vision is for not only for this upcoming season, let's say, but also for the future, right? They've got three more years after this, and so getting them to understand that, for me to get them from where they are now to where they want to be, it was all about them having to really buy into the culture that we had here, and fully, jump into it and be a
Yeah.
big piece of it. So the ones that did, that's the reason why the program's been, pretty successful, and why they were successful as a team or as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to some of the interviews that I've done already here, but I've brought up in almost every one of them how sometimes, you're working so hard on culture, and it doesn't matter. Like the talent that you have doesn't really buy in, or something's off and there's something
Yeah,
wrong. And my last year, my 2020 year, we were as talented as anybody, and it was probably the worst culture team that I had. And
yeah,
like you can win with talent, but at the end of the day, you start losing games that you shouldn't because everyone's a mess, and it's just not where it's supposed to be. I mean, certainly you've had some down years, but I don't know if you've ever had a culture issue. I mean, is that something that you've ever had to deal with, where the culture, I mean, you're talented, but you're just not good in that culture section of the coaching situation. And like, how do you battle there, man?
yeah. I have had to make changes, and I can tell you it was around the same time that Garrett, around his time. So we went through, um, we let's see, we won in 2014 the conference, and then lost 15, 16, and 17.
Hmm.
And so we didn't, and I'm not saying Garrett's the problem with this. I'm just placing it
I'll
in here.
I'll
So
tell him that he's the problem. That'll be fun. That'll be a fun. That'll
make
be
a make a note, Garrett problem. Um,
Oh, I love him. I
but
mean,
we
he's such a great dude. But yeah,
he's a great
yeah,
dude, and he's
yeah,
he's he's one of my all-time favorites because of what he's done, and how hard he worked, and what he had to do to get to be an All-American. Like I
yeah.
saw that happen, so that's cool to watch. But from his freshman year to his senior year, he only won one championship, and that was his senior year. And in between, there were some things going on there that we really kind of had to reinforce what the culture is. And for me, it was about leadership. And so we took a young group: David Smith, Cam Roth, another Rhode Island guy,
Oh yeah, Cam. Yeah,
um,
Cam. Good
Francis
dude as well.
Kokoris. Yeah, great
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
And I took them as after their freshman year, I took them as sophomores and said, okay, here's the deal. Here's what I need from you guys as leaders. I'm going to teach you this, and if
Mm,
you guys buy into this, we're going to be successful.
mm.
And so it was those three that really kind of built it. Then you throw in, Garrett, and who had already been there but has the right piece in mind. And so that was really a change. So for me, that one stands out the most. You're always trying to reinforce the culture, because somebody's always going to try to bucket a little bit,
Right.
and just because they're a little bit selfish, or a little bit like, I should be playing. I'm not sure why this is happening, even though
Transfers.
exactly, transfers kill it. It's mind boggling to me at how the transfer portal now, right, is.
Oh,
It's just something that I stay away from. I have admissions like knocking on my door. Hey, did you see this guy in the transfer portal? I'm like, nope, and I don't care. Like, I'll look, but as soon as
no,
I know who it is, yeah, it's
it's
it,
funny. It's funny
crushes
because
it.
the transfer thing, it seems like a great idea at the
Yep.
time. It really does. But
Yep.
you know, in terms of my experience in my 12-year career, it's always been sort of bittersweet fruit. You know, like there's been
Yeah.
moments where it's been like, oh wow, this worked out great. Oh, this is not gonna go.
Yep. And
So,
there's something to be said. There's a reason why they're in the transfer portal. The
mm,
reason why they're transferring, and not necessarily the ones that have a graduate year like that. That's a different
right,
story, right?
right.
But if you're in your third school and third year, like
Yeah,
there's probably a culture issue there.
yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Uh, Talk a little bit about the differences between coaching men and women. I know that I mean that shouldn't be uh, you know, a controversial statement, but
Yeah,
you know
it
there is
is.
but today it kind of is, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and certainly don't need to go down that road if you don't want to, but I mean you've been successful with both men's and women's programs. I mean, I wonder if there are differences in how you handle the athletes and the systems and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get this question all the time, obviously for my background,
Mm,
from the physical piece. So I have seen over the years that the women are much more into the fundamentals of the skill. The guys want to beat their chest and they be
mm,
like, I'm athletic and and I'll just gonna go out and be, an athletic male and not worry about
mm,
fundamentals. Um, so that's usually the biggest striking point that I've seen between them both. The males that can get away with their athleticism and their power, but then buckle down into the fundamentals, those are the ones that really become all Americans and become
yeah.
great players.
Mm,
But the ones that don't buy into the fundamentals, they just stay to where they're at. Um, the women tend to be a bit more touchy feely, as far as like we need really that team, that team bonding. We need to do team bonding things all the time. We need to, really kind of have that atmosphere.
mm,
Whereas the guys like they want the bonding, but they're more about like we could get into a fight, last night and then go to today's game and then play it like absolute like nothing happened.
right, right.
Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
just beat you up, you just beat me up, but let's go out and beat them up tomorrow. You know what I mean? So like that's just
Yeah.
how it is. With the women will tend to hold on to things a little bit longer. You tend to deal a little more with some of that stuff, some of the grudges, and trying to get them to understand how to let go. And again, it goes back to the compassion and the empathy and understanding, like why did it
Yeah,
happen though? There's a background
yeah,
to it. So
yeah.
it's still communication is still between both teams. It still has to be massive.
Mm,
Um, so those are the things that obviously the guys' game is so much more powerful, so much faster at a Division III level. Like I said, the women just really do well with fundamentals and really kind of build off of that as a team. I think more than the guys do.
yeah, I took a course once for USAV, which is like one of the only courses I took. I think it was like a basic whatever, and they talked about the differences between coaching men and women,
Yeah,
and really, I was hoping for more, and really all I got was, you know, men need to compete to bond, and women need to
yeah,
bond to compete. Like that was
yeah,
that was their big like statement. I was
yeah.
like, all right, it's interesting, but it doesn't help me any. But
Yeah, not at all. I mean, it's accurate, but it
yeah,
definitely doesn't help you in how you want to, resolve problems and stuff.
probably
So,
exactly how my player felt when I say, "Hey, we're passing poorly. We got to fix it." And like, give me more. Tell me exactly what's going on. You've highlighted the issue, but you got to give me the answer. But that's interesting. Yeah, I can't say enough that how much I agree with your compassion part of your culture base. Um, how many teams, and you've seen more volleyball than I have, but how many times have I seen a team that are beating each other up in the middle of a match? Like as things are going on, and I actually talked about it in one of the videos that I made for ResV, where it's like if you're really upset with another person during the match and you're yelling at each other, I mean, you can't play the game well enough
yeah,
in conflict with one of your teammates when you have a net dividing you from the other team that's just looking to thump you more and more. Like you have to
right.
be together at that point. There has to be a compassion of understanding that that kid is doing the best he or she possibly can. and for you to take out your emotional frustration on them because they can't, they can't pass a ball right now. Like you're never going to
Yeah.
win. Like
Yeah,
just
exactly.
never.
I mean, I can't say that I've ever had a player on the court that just made that mistake on purpose. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Right.
So why
Right.
can you, as a teammate, why can you not see that?
Yeah.
It's like
Oh my
he's trying,
gosh.
she's trying,
Yeah.
he's trying, like they're trying.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's just it's mind numbing to me that that's not an obvious, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, like let's give each other a break because no one else in this gym is giving us a
I
break.
know. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So, I mean, I guess the next step of the interview is what's your brand of volleyball, man? I mean, you actually have two brands. You have your men's brand and your women's brand, although currently, your men's team is what you do most.
Yeah.
Women are now in another person's hands, but what's your brand of volleyball?
Wow. That's a good question. Obviously I've gotten questions from recruits like, what's your coaching style? But I think
Mm,
that's different than brand, right? I
yep,
think
yep.
brand for me, I think goes back to everything that you just mentioned. For me, it's about culture. If we can go out
Mm,
and compete with each other and compete against our opponents, then that's a really good brand. Like
mm,
that's at the end of the day, that's what we're looking to be. We want, if players were to watch our games, whether it's online or in person, to see that this is a team that's completely together
mm,
and competing as much as they can. They don't back down. They go out and play the game at a very good level. That's a good brand.
mm.
It's the ones where they falter or you start arguing or like that's the brand we don't want, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say for me, it still goes back to the culture thing. I think the reason why I've enjoyed coaching for so long is that I've had just really good players come into the program as far as being um, great human beings. Not necessarily the skill level. Like we've had some great skill come in, and we've had some skill that has gotten built to be great.
Mm,
But to start with, the whole foundation is that they're really good people, and culture's easy from there. So I
mm.
think that's probably been my brand over the years. Is that if you had mentioned it again before we started this, is that you're friends with some of the guys still that I've
Oh yeah.
coached, right? And
Oh yeah.
part of it is because of who they are. So
Yeah.
yeah, good people.
I've had what, three assistant coaches that played for you?
Yeah.
Kevin Harrington, Matt Ferreira, and
Yeah.
the above Garrett. So I
Garrett.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Volleyball
so,
junkies.
yeah,
Volleyball junkies, man.
yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the next step, which is I'd love to know. I mean, you've been involved in volleyball forever, more than me. Craziest moments as a coach, like give me a couple of those.
During a match,
if
like
you're la- if you're laughing, that means there's something there.
when a match is going on.
Sure, sure,
All
yeah,
right. So Rampo College, but way back in the day, this is early 2000s. Don Vanderbeek was the coach. I don't know if you remember
yeah,
Don at all.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, had his son on his lap. His little son was, I don't know what age, but um, during the match he had to call a timeout because the son peed on him. He was sitting on his lap and he just let it go. So
Oh,
that was
that's rough.
probably my most favorite coaching memory. I mean, then you have the Cal Wiccan stories and all
Oh
that.
man,
He's just a
uh,
piece of work there. Love him to
dude,
death, but
he's something
he's a
else.
sideshow.
Oh, he is something else,
He is
man.
great. He is
That
great.
dude. Oh, and the funny thing about Cal is that everybody, and I'm not gonna ask you to do it, but everybody has a Cal Wickens impression. Like every single person has a
Yeah,
Cal Wickens impression.
yeah,
And Garpy and I, Coach Garpy, it was my assistant. We used to do it all the time because he liked us. He's like, man, love those JWU guys. They show up, they come play us, and it was like, every year we get started, Garrett be like, "Are we going down to Nazareth?" I said, "Oh, absolutely, we're going down to Nazareth. We're gonna play Nazareth, and he's gonna beat us with their purple team, and then
yeah.
after the purple team's done beating us, they're gonna do the green team, and and afterwards we'll go get lasagna. It'll be great."
Yeah, yeah. He was a great chef. Did you know that?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the first year he brought us down, we ended up going over, and
Yeah.
and we play him, and he thumps us real good, like, and that's where he gave us, I actually had my purple team out for you, and but if my purple team couldn't get it done, I'd have my blue team, and it was like, dude, how many fucking teams does he have? And pardon my French, I didn't mean to, I didn't mean to cuss, but like, it was like, how many teams does he have? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And afterwards, he's like, "Hey, what are you guys doing for dinner?" And I blanked. I'm like, I don't know what we're doing." He's like, "Well, come upstairs. I'll take care of you." So we go upstairs, and there's this whole spread out. Like there's pasta, there's
Yeah.
pizza, there's all. He's like, "Dude, my best friend's a chef over here. I used to be a chef. I mean, I didn't go to
Yeah.
J Woo. I went to the culinary, something different. But
Yeah.
I love
That dude
you
could cook.
culinary. Oh, dude, he took care of us, and he's like, "Oh, you need a restaurant? I got a restaurant for you." He
Yeah.
gives it next time down. I love him. I'll
Yeah.
always be grateful for guys like you and guys like Cal, guys like Steve England, Evan Gilio. Because
Yeah.
one of my biggest problems was I was a basketball guy and I was pretending to be a volleyball guy. So when guys like you were like, "Hey, Rez is all right," I was like, "All right, I'm in. I finally got
Yeah.
there." And then once Charlie Sullivan said I was okay, that's good too. I was like, "This is
There we
great.
go.
Who else is gonna say I'm all right?" Like this is so
That's awesome.
yeah, it was pretty fun. But yeah, that's a great story. Have any other crazy stories that have happened to you when you've been on the bench?
Uh, I mean, I have the Kevin Harrington broken leg one. That was
Ooh,
horrific.
that is as bad
Um,
as it gets.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was rough. As far as just awkward or weird moments, I think you know there's always stuff with your assistant coaches, right? So there's always the inside jokes, and there's always something that happens. But um, oh man, dude, this is a tough one. I think for me, I don't know. Do you remember Jerry Maticata?
No, I don't know that one.
So Jerry was the commissioner of NECMA way back, and he
Oh
would
yeah.
just come in and just sit behind you while you're coaching and just talk to you about random stuff. And
Already like where this is going.
yeah, and so it's like well, yeah, I'm a younger coach at the time, trying to kind of establish that we're probably in a big game, it was a NECMA game, and he's just da 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 da. And so finally, my assistant just kind of like leaned over to him and goes, "Hey," he's like, introduce himself. And it's like, "Oh, I'm Jerry Maticata." I'm like, "Jerry, can you just wait to the end of end of the match to share the story?" And he was like so offended that we were talking to him or weren't going to talk to him during a game. Like it was
Wow.
just
Wow.
really bizarre. Like super nice guy.
Yeah.
Still around today and like did a lot
Yeah.
for the sport and everything, but it was just a weird scenario. So, for me, there's just I don't think a whole lot of things stand out, but there's so many things that happen that just are a little bit surreal, And I can remember I was actually talking to one of my old alumni and Madai College that's closing down.
The dice closing? I didn't know that.
It's closing, yeah, yeah.
I
This
didn't
is
know
the, this is
that.
the, this is the last year, so
Holy
um,
smokes.
they added on to their gym like maybe 10 years ago, and so we went up there. Men's volleyball's in the spring, right? So it was like sometime in January we were up there. I'm coaching in my winter parka, a hat, because the construction is behind the bench, and they
No.
just had it blocked off by like the plastic sheets. And there's debris just flying out in the court from the wind during the game. It was like snowing debris while the game's on. I'm like,
Oh.
what is going on here? So that was
That's
I was
incredible.
just telling that story actually last week. So that was pretty bizarre. Um,
Man, I didn't
yeah,
know Madai is out the door. Like
yeah,
Madai, if you had told me what 10 years ago, 8 years
yeah,
ago, that Madai would be closing their doors and Deauville would be D2, I would told you were nuts because it was the reverse. Madai was
exactly.
high level and Deauville
Yep,
was sort of struggle land.
yep.
And I just never would have thought that. That's interesting.
Deauville making that move Division 2 seemed like it helped them stay afloat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Madai has just never caught up.
No kidding. Huh.
But
That's wild.
yeah,
That's so wild.
pretty bizarre.
Goodness.
Especially like you said, from back in the day how strong they were volleyball wise and how important they were to the kind of the volleyball landscape. So you thought the school was kind of like on good grounds. But yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the whole university, the whole college is closing down.
That's wow, that's tough. That's very, very
Yep.
tough. Goodness gracious. So
Yeah.
let's talk biggest wins and toughest defeats, man.
Oh man, Johnson and Wales defeats for the women's side.
Yeah. It ain't the men's side. I know that.
Sorry.
That used to be my number one joke with you. It was like, all right, so you've got 500 wins and I've given you 175 of them.
Yeah, thank you, Scott Reslow.
You'd be sub 500 if it weren't for me, man. You'd be sub 400 if it weren't for me.
Yeah, I appreciate you for that. That's for sure.
Oh, I do what I can to help the sport.
Well, I will say you did not make it easy, man. I mean, it was always hard, and we never liked playing in that gym because it was a different space. I mean, the Muldoon, as you know, was a
Tough place to
smaller,
play.
still
Tough place
a
to
small
play.
gym, right? And a tough place to play for most teams. So we got so used to it that we go into these bigger gyms. It's a different environment for us. It's the spacing and just depth perception is just so off. And to just drive in a bus and go down and play for 2 hours and not be used to that space after practicing in our gym for a week.
Yeah.
Like it's challenging. Like that, Emmanuel, all those big gyms, we always struggle in those gyms. And then you have good teams. So it's a double-edged sword. But I think for me, any game that we lost, any championship game that we lost in the Muldoon were probably like the harder ones for me to swallow, just because there's obviously a reason why you're playing a playoff game at home. So being the seed that's higher and you lose, that's always a challenging thing, because then you start thinking like, what did I, it goes back to you as a coach. What did I do wrong?
Of
What
course.
could we have done better? You
Yeah.
start overthinking the whole process.
You gave me that feeling many times.
Yeah. Sorry. I think back, going way back, talking about Madai, there was a game 2004. We were in the NECFA championship match, and we lost in 5, and it was. I never blame referees, but there was all the refs were all Madai referees, like all in that area. That was before NECFA, and that was the year that NECFA made the change of, okay, we're going to draw 2 from New England, 2 referees from New England, 2 from this area, 2 from this area, and have a rotating referee staff during the tournament. Right. We lost in 5, and like that was, for me, that was heartbreaking. It was early in my career, and I really thought like we got a little bit robbed on it. But it is what it is. So that one always stands out. There's so many, the ones that stand out are always the ones that you lose, right?
That's right. That's
the
right.
Coaching standpoint, you just think about all of the ones that you can probably replay the entire game in your head and what went wrong. Or what you think went wrong, right? And the ones that you win, you're kind of like, yeah, well, we were supposed to win.
Yeah.
You mentioned Charlie Sullivan. I think he runs such an amazing program that, we've been fortunate. We've beat him a few times over my career, and so having a win over Springfield, I think is a massive accomplishment for a school that, a school our size.
Yeah.
So that those always stand out. Those were always kind of nice. I think beating Juniata in the NCAA tournament, that game, right when the NCAA started back in 2013, that we went, when 2012, we went 5 with Santa Cruz in the NCAA tournament and lost in 5. That was an unbelievable match. And that was the first year for the NCAA to have a sanctioned tournament. And then the next year we played Juniata and we beat them 3-0. That was Aaron Almario and those guys.
Oh yeah.
That was a fun match. Just to win that game was awesome, and that was the year of the Boston Marathon bombing. So things were all up in the air. Are we going to play? It was actually supposed to be at MIT. They were supposed to host. That got shifted. So there's a lot of memories tied to a lot of different things, but those games stand out. But I think, and then you have the old coach saying, like, any game that we won a championship really stands out for me, So, they're all awesome. They're all great in their own their own
Yeah.
regard, and you had to get to that point. So
Yeah. Oh, those are some great stories, man. Like those are some stories that are really high level. You made me think about the NECVA again. I haven't thought about the NECVA in a while.
yeah,
I missed I always thought that should have stayed. I know once the NCAA sort of went into the sanction mode of sanctioning a championship, and then we had our little mini NCAA tournament. But I remember that was sort of something that I was like, oh, it's really a shame because the NECVA was a lot of fun.
yeah.
It was a big tournament. A lot of teams got involved. I want to say, was it 12 teams or 15 teams? It was something enormous.
It grew from 12 to 16 or 18 at the end of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It was massive. It was over 3 days. And you talk about like the volleyball vibes, like that's part of the reason too. Like NECVA was just a big vibe. You know, it was
Mm,
just teams getting together that love to compete, all coming together, over one weekend to play. And it was just a big, not like a party, but it was just different. It's different than
yeah.
what the NCAA tournament is right now.
Yeah. And then once the NCAA sanctioned it, the NECVA dissolved. And it was like, that was one of the things when I got into the business. I was like, all right, what are my goals? My goals are to win the GNEC championship, certainly. But my goal is to be a part of the NECVA. I need to get in that NECVA tournament somehow. I need to beat Springfield. I need to beat Santa Cruz. I need to beat Riv. I need to beat, you have a list of teams that you want to be successful against because that shows that you've done the job well,
Right.
and it provides those memories. And when the NECVA dissolved, I was like, oh, that stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, I mean, it got to the point, it got an NCAA to where it needed to be, right? So that was kind of the
Mhm.
job of the NECVA. That was the vision of that conference back in the day, was to eventually have an NCAA tournament. But yeah, once it broke up, you're kind of like, well, this is never going to happen again. This
Yeah.
just the vibe and the atmosphere and everything that,
Yeah.
that it brought. It was such a cool thing.
It's like the dissolving of the Big East in basketball. It was kind of
Yeah.
like, oh, like how many cool
Yeah.
things happened in that Big East tournament? How many cool things happened in that NECVA tournament?
Exactly. Yeah, it
So
was
many neat things.
tough to see from there. There's so many stories from NECVA too, like just so many. We like this podcast would be way too long if I started talking stories from way back then.
Well, I mean, we have time, but you probably have something to do. I could sit and talk the entire time, man. Oh, so cool. So, uh, as we're getting to the end of the broadcast here, I love to ask these questions, sort of the main questions that I ask everybody. The first is, what's one thing that you think a coach should know that they probably don't?
One thing that coach should know that they probably don't. I think for me, well, that's a tough question. I think it still goes back to um, having don't be afraid to have the conversation with your players, and don't be afraid to let them run things.
Mm,
If you are working on the leadership and you're working on culture, then they know what they're doing. And you just, the less rules, the better. Coaches tend to have like 1,000 rules that all these players got to live by. And
mm,
really it's, the biggest one is just like represent, and
yep,
so you can really break that down. But I think if you can let the players have a lot of input into what you're trying to accomplish, then they're going to buy in quicker, and
mm,
they're going to buy in for the whole period because they have something invested into it, right? They have something that this is meaningful for them because this is what they decide they want to do, and so they're going to work even that much harder, which makes your job as a coach easier. You just got
mm,
to teach the sport.
yeah, yeah. Same question for a player. What should a player know that they probably don't?
Yeah, they probably hear this a lot
Everything.
at Riv, everything, right? Um, they don't want to hear this, but I always tell them, you don't get good at blocking until you're about 29 or 30 years old.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, I think, and we say it to a lot of the athletes, is that you only have 4 years. So I don't think they get that as freshmen. I think they're like, oh, it's 4 years away, and then next thing
Hell
you know,
yeah.
it's those 4 years are done. So um, really trusting the coach, that the coach has their best interest at heart and really putting in everything they can. I think a lot of players don't do that. I think they think they're working hard, but they really don't know what it
Yeah, they
is to
don't
work
know.
hard yet.
Yeah, agree. agree. And that's the work ethic aspect is, besides the culture, is the other part, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean, you set the culture in, and then how hard are you going to work at it, in
Yep.
terms of the game, in terms of your body, in terms of preparation, all that stuff. And I think you nailed it. A lot of them think they're working hard, but they don't really know what that
Yeah.
is.
They're not even hitting the top of that yet.
Right, 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 right. So talk about your business here, the CCK mental performance stuff.
Yeah. So I've been teaching them. We kind of hit on a lot during this talk, but the mental performance side of things is something that I've really taught from over a decade ago. That I'm a big believer that there's three aspects of things, right? There's the physical, doing a skill, doing a skill, doing a skill. What you just said, you got to hit the weight room, weight room, weight
Mhm.
room, weight room. And then the third thing is the mentality piece and being able to, be gritty, have resilience, be able to outcompete, all those things. That's all mindset, right? That's
Mm,
all being able to um, put your mind to you're going to do something and then going out and actually accomplishing it without backing down. So for me, I've got a business where I teach basically resilience. I teach players how to get to the next level. Um, a lot of it is, if athletes are trying to get to the next level, they need to break some old habits that they have.
yeah.
And when the stuff hits the fan, you're going to sink to the habits that you know.
Mhm.
So if you know giving up, or if you know not how to fight, or if you know not how to compete, or you come inward, or you get nervous, or whatever it may be, that's what you're going to fall back on when it gets tight, when a situation arises that you need to actually do something in. So I teach them how to have new habits. I teach them specific systems, specific rituals, specific anything that will get them better. I'll teach them how to do that, and it's all personalized. Um, so for me, there's a three-phase system that we talk about. It's about awareness, it's about strategy, and it's about elevation.
Mm,
So figuring out what's going on in their head and what they're saying to themselves, what are their goals, like that's the whole awareness piece. All those three things, they've got to have awareness on those three things, and I teach them that. And then there's specific strategies and systems that I teach them as far as in-game, pre-game, post-game, things that will really help them stay focused and stay in the moment.
mm,
And then it's about getting to the next level. So how do you elevate? How do you get to that where you want to be, that goal that you set? How do you get there? So from being a leader, so we teach a lot of leadership stuff, to alter ego stuff, to just, hey, this is par for the course. Like, you had a bad day, but tomorrow's another day. This is what we got to start working on again. So
yeah.
for me, it's a massive piece. I really believe that there's a new level, new devil. You hear that a lot, right? And so if
Sure.
if
Yeah.
you're trying to get to that next level, there's always going to be somebody who's bigger, faster, or stronger than you.
Mhm.
But you can outcompete them, and you can outgrind them, and you can outwork them if you have the right skills and the right tools to be able to do it.
Mm. Oh, I love it. I mean, I think it's something I wish my team could have used in 2012 and on.
Yeah. I I I tell you, like I think one of the things that you said, some of the questions earlier, I think a lot of it for me, like what separated my teams from a lot of teams, is that mental piece.
Mm,
And probably that's a little bit of the culture that I've built in too, is I really emphasized the mental aspect of the game more than probably other coaches have.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had a couple of Johnson and Wales had a couple of teams when I was there that were close to getting you. I think a couple times we went five, maybe one. I don't remember, but again, your teams were always almost unflappable. Like, you guys weren't
Yeah.
panicking. Whereas, one of the main ways that you win in this sport at the collegiate level is you knock them over. Like,
Yeah.
you got someone wobbled, they're in trouble, they're panicking, and you knock them over. And you know, you're really working hard to make sure that you're not doing that as a team. Like, you don't want to be in that situation where, right, things are bad, but if things get worse, we're done,
Right.
versus staying in, I like the way you describe it, staying in the moment and battling and fighting your way out of that situation, to either live to fight another set or turn the tide completely and get the
Yeah.
upper hand and see if you can win that set or that match. But yeah, I mean, that
Yeah.
was one of the
Absolutely.
things that I think you do really well. I think Evan does really well at Wentworth. I think Charlie's always done it well at Springfield. Certainly the NAS teams have been in that situation. UC Santa Cruz were another team that was really hard to just knock over. Like, I
Yep.
mean, you would get close, and then you just, that was why when I knocked them over finally, I was, jumping in my office later that night. I
Yeah,
was like,
it's
yeah,
hard. It's hard to beat a team that doesn't quit, and so I think that's
yeah,
the biggest thing. Those teams that you just named off, those coaches, like they instill something in their teams that are just like, yeah, this is just a par for the course. Let's just go out and
yeah,
battle.
yeah, yeah. It's the idea. Hey, we're going to go 5 regardless. So just be
Yeah,
ready to go. And then if you win in 3, it's a bonus. Like, all right, hey,
right.
we won in 3. That's sweet. But we're always planning to play for 5. That's sort of what I've sort of started doing with my South County team. Hey, we're going to go 3 because we don't get to do 5, but we're going to go 3.
Yeah,
It's going to happen. We're going to lose.
yeah,
We have to prep for 3. And then if we win in 2, oh, this is great. Like, we get to move on fast. But,
exactly.
um, yeah, I think I've always thought you've done a real nice job there. I mean, your teams
Thank
are
you, Coach.
always really,
I,
really tough. Really,
I
really tough.
appreciate
Well,
that.
I've never been you, so it doesn't matter. Proof is in the pudding.
Appreciate that,
Again,
my friend.
that's another one of the lines I've been using. Like my interview series has become the interviewing coaches that I have a losing record against. Oh gosh. So last thing, before I ask the famous, what's the future hold for you? We've talked about culture, we've talked about some other things as well. What has been your biggest trick to dealing with personalities that are not buying into what you need to go? I mean, certainly the one thing to do is just jettison the personality. Hey,
Yeah,
it's not working out. Sorry. But
yep.
when you have somebody who you like and maybe the personality is just really wild, how do you deal with that?
A lot of conversations.
Yep.
It's
Communication.
really, it's almost a daily conversation. Like, hey, that was a good practice, or hey, that was a bad practice, and here's why.
Mm,
And I think if you can get them to understand that ultimately they have a vision of where they see themselves going, right? So if you can get them to change that, how they look at their vision, and say, like, you need the team to do that,
mm,
right? You need to be able to trust your player, trust your teammates, and to be able to really buy into what we're teaching here. And you can still be who you are,
mm.
but you've got to be able to fit into this a little bit so the team can help you, because what you're telling me is your goal, you're not going to accomplish on your own, and you're not going to accomplish on the bench.
Right.
So you got to be on the court to do it. So this is what we need you to do. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm just asking you to look at what is going to make you better, and try to change that habit a little bit.
Unless you like coaching, being on the bench is not a great place to be. If you want to
Exactly.
learn, if you want to learn how to coach, sit right next to me. We'll do we'll
Yeah.
do our thing.
Right.
But I'm guessing you want to be on the floor hitting balls. So
Yeah.
very cool. Very cool. All right, man. The future. We're on the third heading home. What's the future
Yes.
for you?
Uh, Volleyball. I got a 4-year-old son at home with three and three quarters. So
There you go.
whatever he tells me to do, that's what we're gonna do. That's the future. So, um, I think ideally coaching is in my blood. I've always been good at it. I love doing the mental performance piece of things as well. So, still being able to have that as a side gig, working with all types of different athletes, which is awesome. So,
Hmm.
my future is looking to win a GNAC championship and being able to empower as many leaders as I possibly can in the sports world, and making them into something that's going to carry into their lives for the rest of their lives. So that's kind of how I see my future. And my mission and my vision is to make as many leaders as I possibly can through Rivier and outside of Riv.
Hmm. Very, very cool. Awesome. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being on the show, man. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your time. Love talking shop with you. And what
Yeah.
most people won't know is that Craig and I were talking for an hour prior. We haven't gotten to see each other in a while, but dude, always
Yeah.
great seeing you. If you like this content, always like and subscribe for us. And I hate saying it because it's cheesy as can be, but I mean, it's the world we live in now.
It is the world.
Uh, and if you like what I'm doing here, come support it in some way, because I'm going to continue to get really these awesome coaches on, share some tidbits, and at a minimum tell you about how they beat me into a pulp for most of the time they saw me. So, all right, everyone, have a great rest of your week. Take care, and see you in a bit.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you.